photograph sat in a locked drawer deep inside a JSOC briefing room. Grainy, night vision green, it captured a figure slipping between shadows in Mosul. Only a few eyes had ever seen it, and fewer still knew the story behind it. Operators whispered about her, a phantom whose existence seemed to defy reason. The official files called her Alina Ward, though no one could confirm if the name was real, or just a placeholder for the untraceable operative the intelligence community referred to as Ghost. In the room, the air was thick with anticipation and tension. The operators didn't speak aloud. They didn't need to. The image on the table, shadowy, almost formless, was enough to send a shiver down the spine of even the most battle-hardened SEAL. The woman in the photo didn't move like a soldier. She moved like a shadow itself, a living absence that slipped unnoticed through enemy lines, avoiding detection with a skill that seemed almost supernatural. The director of JSOC, a tall, iron-faced man named General Harper, set the photo on the table with deliberate weight. He leaned forward, his gaze sweeping the room, reading every furrowed brow. "We have a problem," he said, voice low, controlled, yet urgent. "And that problem is the next 72 hours. Operators shifted in their seats. The briefing room was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above, each flicker echoing off the cold, steel walls. The images on the screen behind Harper flashed: satellite recon of eastern Syria, intelligence reports, intercepted communications, and maps dotted with red zones. Each marker represented lives at risk, operations teetering on collapse, and death just around the corner. Harper continued. "A SEAL team, Team 8, is pinned in Deir ez-Zor. Communications have been severed. Enemy fire is heavy. Time is running out. We need someone who can move inside that compound undetected, neutralize the threat, and extract our people. And we have one choice." He paused. His gaze landed on the photograph again. The shadowy figure of Alina Ward stared back at the room, as though she could see every operator inside, judging them. "She's already accepted the mission," Harper said, "and she's operating alone." The words hung in the air like smoke. A few operators swallowed hard, some shifted uneasily in their seats. Alone. No support, no backup, just the Ghost moving in the dark where no one else could follow. One young SEAL, barely out of training, finally broke the silence. "Sir, if she's real, how do we even know she'll succeed?" Harper didn't answer immediately. He let the weight of the room press on the question, letting it fester. Then he leaned back, folding his hands on the table. "Because," he said slowly, deliberately, "no SEAL has ever seen her twice." The room went quiet again. No one laughed. No one breathed too loudly. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. That sentence wasn't a boast, it was a warning. The Ghost didn't fail. She didn't follow rules. She didn't operate like anyone else in the military world. She moved unseen, unheard, untouchable, and she left no trace. Outside the briefing room, the wind gusted across the base, rattling the windows, making the shadows in the corners of the room dance. The men in the room felt it, an instinctual tension that ran down the spine, the kind that comes when danger is immediate but unseen. They had trained for ambushes, firefights, and high-stakes missions, but this was different. This was walking into the unknown and trusting someone who might as well have been a ghost. Harper stood, straightening his uniform. "I know you're wondering why we aren't sending another team, why we aren't deploying every operator we have. The answer is simple: they won't make it. The compound is too fortified, too unpredictable. Our usual tactics will fail. Only Ghost can navigate this." A senior SEAL officer, a veteran with lines carved deep into his face from years in the Middle East, finally spoke, voice low and skeptical. "Sir, with all due respect, she's not one of us. We've never worked with her. How do we know?" "Enough," Harper cut in, eyes sharp. You never have. That's the point. She doesn't follow predictable patterns. She isn't bound by fear. She doesn't need guidance. She moves like a shadow and leaves the enemy chasing ghosts while we save lives they can't even account for." He stepped closer to the table, resting both hands on it. His voice dropped almost to a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Ghost has never failed. She will get in, she will accomplish the mission, and she will extract our operators. And by the time you hear anything about it, it will already be over. The young SEAL swallowed again, nodding slightly, though his stomach twisted at the thought. The room filled with a tense silence, punctuated only by the distant hum of the bass, the low thrum of engines, and the faint echo of footsteps somewhere down the hall. Everyone in the room felt the presence of the unknown, a silent, invisible operator whose very existence challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. Then Harper added something even more unsettling. You will not see her, you will not communicate with her, you will never know how she does it. And if you do, remember, no one survives the exposure. Ghost is not someone to confront, she is someone to respect and to fear. The operators exchanged nervous glances. Fear was an emotion they were trained to suppress, but this was different. Ghost wasn't just dangerous, she was a force outside their understanding. They were not her team. They were not part of her mission. They were merely collateral in a war she was already rewriting on her own terms. Harper motioned to the photo one last time. She's on her way, and by the time she's done, you won't know what hit them or who saved you. The room went silent. A chill settled over everyone. Outside, the base wind howled through the night, carrying with it the sense that something unseen was moving, swift, deliberate, unstoppable. The young SEAL lingered a moment longer, staring at the photo. The blurred figure seemed almost alive, almost aware of him, almost mocking him with her silence. And then he realized she was already gone. No one had seen her enter the building, and no one would ever see her move again until it was too late. The director's words echoed in the back of every operator's mind as the room emptied slowly, one by one. No SEAL has ever seen her twice. Outside in the darkness beyond the base, a shadow slipped silently through the perimeter. No sound, no trace, only the faint shimmer of movement in the corner of a camera lens. The ghost had arrived, and what she would do next would change everything. Though no one in the room, no one on the base, could possibly know how. 3 years earlier, before Elena Ward became the phantom JSOC called Ghost, she was already stirring whispers in the most elite circles of the U.S. military. No one had a name for her yet. She was just a shadow moving where shadows shouldn't exist. It was late in the evening in Raqqa. A corner of the city still smoldered from weeks of airstrikes. Streets were littered with rubble, metal, and shattered glass, the remains of what had once been a bustling neighborhood. The smell of smoke mixed with dust hung thick in the air, biting at the lungs of anyone who dared to breathe. A SEAL team, Team 6, fresh from a mission that went sideways, was pinned down. Enemy fighters had them trapped in a narrow alleyway, rifles sweeping through broken walls and debris. 3 operators were wounded, crouched behind overturned crates. Ammunition was low. Their radio had gone dead 10 minutes ago. And somewhere in the city, the distant sound of explosions echoed like the beat of a war drum. The team leader, Lieutenant Jackson "Jax" Turner, scanned the alley with a frantic intensity, barking orders while trying to keep his men calm. Every movement seemed to draw enemy fire. Every glance outside the cover brought a hail of bullets. They were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Then the shadows shifted. At first it was subtle, something gliding along the edges of the alley between ruined walls, too smooth to be the enemy. Jackson froze, squinting into the darkness. His adrenaline surged, but his mind tried to process the impossible. Someone or something was moving inside enemy territory with absolute confidence and without a single sound. A figure emerged, clad in black tactical gear, but unlike any uniform he had ever seen. No patches, no insignia, nothing to mark affiliation. She moved fluidly, almost like water flowing through the gaps of the crumbling buildings. Every step seemed precise, rehearsed, impossible to follow. Jackson raised his rifle instinctively. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted, voice cutting through the night air. The figure's head tilted slightly. Dark eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned him for less than a second. Then she raised a gloved hand and shook her head. If you shoot, every fighter within a mile will know exactly where you are. Before he could respond, she was gone again, slipping into the shadows as if they themselves had swallowed her. Seconds passed. Then chaos erupted elsewhere in the alley. Explosions rocked nearby buildings. Enemy fighters screamed orders in a language he didn't understand. Through it all, the team remained alive, the wounded somehow untouched. Jackson's jaw tightened. "Did anyone else see that?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. His team's eyes were wide, disbelief etched on every face. One of the SEALs, Private First Class Lopez, shook his head. "Saw what, sir? There's nothing there." "Nothing? Nothing just saved our asses," Jackson said, his voice low and urgent. He glanced at the alley walls, trying to spot any movement, but there was none. Just shadows, smoke, and debris. Minutes later, after the enemy had been temporarily suppressed by the mysterious explosions, Jackson's radio flickered. A distorted, automated voice cracked through. "Unit status, pending extraction." Jackson looked down at the wounded men and back toward where the figure had vanished. "We were saved by what?" Lopez shrugged. "I don't know, something that doesn't exist." The thought lingered like a cold wind through the alley. Something that doesn't exist. And yet, it had operated with lethal precision, moving unseen among enemies who had no clue what hit them. Jackson tried to shake off the unease. They had been trained for ambushes, traps, and improvisation, but this was something else entirely. Whoever, or whatever, moved through the chaos had skills that defied logic. As the SEALs regrouped and prepared for extraction, a faint movement caught Jackson's eye near a collapsed wall. He raised his rifle again, but by the time he aimed, the figure had vanished once more. No weapon fire, no sound, no trace. Later, in the safety of a temporary base, Jackson would recount the encounter to his team, but even then the words felt inadequate. How could he describe someone who seemed to bend reality itself? A woman, or maybe more than a woman, moving with the instincts of a predator, yet entirely silent, entirely unseen, almost untouchable. "Someone needs to tell me what just happened," Lopez muttered, "because I don't think that was human." Jackson didn't answer. He only stared at the spot where she had disappeared. Part of him didn't want the explanation because the truth, whatever it was, felt like it could unravel everything they thought they knew about warfare. Back at JSOC, when debriefing officers heard the story, they immediately traced patterns from other engagements. What they discovered was shocking. Missions across Syria and Iraq had similar accounts. Operators would experience impossible interventions. Hostage situations resolved in ways that defied logic. Enemy attacks neutralized without a trace. One recurring theme emerged. She moved like a ghost, invisible until she wanted to be seen, present only when critical, and then gone again, leaving only confusion and awe behind. By the time Jackson finished his story, the intelligence analysts had pieced together a terrifying possibility. She wasn't just a highly trained operative. She was a force the enemy could neither predict nor counter. And yet, she didn't belong to any unit, branch, or official roster. "Whoever she is," one analyst said quietly, leaning back in her chair, "JSOC will want her. We can't afford to ignore this." And that's how Alina Ward's existence transitioned from rumor to classified asset. A shadow moving through battlefields, a whisper of fear in the corridors of elite military operations, a phantom who could never be pinned, captured, or fully understood. For Jackson, Lopez, and the rest of the SEAL team, the memory stayed with them. Every time they engaged in combat, every time they moved through hostile territory, they couldn't help but wonder. What if she's there again, watching, protecting, or testing us? No one knew how she had done what she did in Raqqa that night. No one could explain how she slipped in and out of danger with surgical precision, saving lives without ever being seen. And that was the unnerving part. The SEALs were trained to handle fear, to anticipate danger, to rely on skill and training. But Ghost, Alina Ward, had introduced a new variable, one that could not be measured, predicted, or contained. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the battlefield she moved again, watching, waiting, calculating. Because the first time anyone saw her move, they didn't realize they had just encountered something extraordinary. And no one would ever see her twice. Alina Ward didn't come from any of the programs most soldiers would recognize. She had never passed through Bud S, never endured Ranger School, never been deployed as a Delta operator. There was no biography, no dossier, no hometown. Officially, she didn't exist. But that was precisely what made her so dangerous. She had been recruited into a program long thought to be defunct, a shadow within a shadow. Hidden deep in the Nevada desert, a secluded facility operated beyond the jurisdiction of conventional military oversight. The program, known internally as Project Chameleon, was designed to create operatives who could move undetected through any environment, blend with any crowd, and survive in conditions that would destroy conventional soldiers. Her instructors were veteran spies, ex-special operations officers, and behavioral psychologists who had spent decades pushing human limits. They didn't measure physical strength alone. They didn't train for brute force. They engineered invisibility in combat, in surveillance, and in perception itself. Alina was not the fastest. She was not the strongest. She was not the tallest. But she had something else. An instinct for disappearance that bordered on preternatural. Within days of her first assignment in the program, instructors noticed how she navigated obstacles that had trapped even seasoned trainees. A simple wall became a non-issue. Sensors and alarms seemed to register nothing in her presence. One instructor, Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, wrote in her file a single chilling line. "This one doesn't move through shadows, she becomes them." Her first months were grueling. She learned how to manipulate light, sound, and movement so that even surveillance cameras would miss her. She trained in urban combat, but unlike conventional drills, her exercises involved no team, no guidance, no safety net. Simulated threats came from every direction: gunfire, explosions, laser sensors, and live drones designed to kill anyone who triggered them. One exercise almost broke her. She had to infiltrate a mock enemy compound under total darkness. Her only tools were intuition, a small tactical knife, and a suit designed to mask thermal signatures. Cameras and automated guards scanned every hallway, every room, every corner. At first, she froze, heart pounding as the alarms triggered one after another. Every failed attempt brought a harsh reprimand from her instructors. She failed 7 times in a row. On the 8th attempt, something inside her clicked. She stopped thinking like a soldier. She stopped moving like a human. She moved like a ghost. She slipped past laser grids, avoided cameras, and incapacitated a mechanical guard without a single sound. The final checkpoint was a locked door with a biometric scanner. Instead of trying to hack it, she observed the guard's pattern, timed her movement, and slipped through an opening that technically didn't exist. She had beaten the system, not with brute force, but by bending it to her presence. After that, the instructors stopped giving her advice. They only observed, quietly nodding her every move. She had become the anomaly the program had been designed to create: untouchable, untraceable, unstoppable. Yet the deeper she went into the program, the more she began to question the purpose behind it. The facility trained dozens of individuals like her, ghosts in their own right. But she quickly realized something disturbing. The program didn't intend to use their abilities to protect lives. It intended to control them, weaponize them for operations that bypassed all oversight. Governments could deny knowledge of her missions, but they would profit from every strike she carried out. Every life extinguished could be erased from history, every operation untraceable. The more she discovered, the more she understood that she was not a soldier anymore. She was an instrument, a weapon designed to move through war zones unnoticed, to remove threats before anyone even realized they existed. And that weaponization was something she could never condone. Then came the breaking point. A senior officer in the program ordered her to participate in a high-stakes operation outside the facility, a live mission that targeted civilians mistaken for enemies, but in reality were completely uninvolved. The instruction came with a sterile, emotionless briefing. Mission parameters, coordinates, extraction points, nothing about morality, ethics, or collateral damage. Alina looked at the maps, studied the layout, and understood instantly. If she followed orders, innocent lives would be lost, and she would be the ghost responsible. Her hands shook as she packed her gear. She had been trained to obey. She had been trained to execute with precision, but she had not been trained to compromise her own conscience. In a single, deliberate decision, she walked away. No alarms sounded. No one noticed at first. She disappeared into the Nevada night, leaving the facility behind without so much as a trace. She left her identification, her gear, and her past life in a pile in the desert. She had nothing but what she could carry and what she could teach herself to trust. For months, she existed in the wilderness, hiding in abandoned cabins, living off the land, practicing the skills she had mastered but never used in the field. She could vanish into forests, melt into crowds in urban areas, and move silently across miles of desert without leaving footprints detectable by standard tracking technology. Her greatest asset, she realized, was not the training itself. It was her own mind. She had learned to anticipate patterns, calculate movements of multiple opponents simultaneously, and exploit weaknesses no one else could see. She had been trained to survive, but she had mastered the art of not being found at all. Yet even in isolation, she could feel the pull of the world she had abandoned. Intelligence reports flickered across encrypted channels she occasionally monitored, showing areas of conflict where lives were at risk, where ordinary soldiers were being trapped in impossible situations. She knew she could intervene, she could act, and no one would know it was her. That was when JSOC found her. A lone recruiter arrived at her cabin one cold evening. The desert wind carried the scent of dust and sagebrush. He didn't knock. He didn't introduce himself. He simply stepped into the shadow of the cabin, voice low but authoritative. "Alina," he said, "we're not here to drag you back. We're here because a SEAL team is about to die unless you help." She didn't answer. She didn't move. She only studied him, assessing every micro-expression, every sign of threat, every trace of deception. In seconds, she understood the offer, the mission, and the consequences of refusal. She could refuse and disappear again. She could vanish forever. Or she could act, save lives, and embrace a role she had trained for but had rejected. The recruiter waited calm. He didn't push. But the weight of his gaze carried unspoken truth. If she walked away again, the lives of elite operators, trained warriors, would be lost, and she knew she could prevent that. A faint exhale escaped her lips. She made a single choice. "I'll go," she said. And just like that, the ghost was reborn, not as a weapon of a shadow program, but as an independent operative, moving with total freedom and total lethal precision. Her enemies would never see her coming. Her allies would never see her leave, and the world would know her only by legend, by whispers, by the myth she had already begun to build. A phantom, an invisible guardian, a force that could not be caught, tracked, or repeated. The world didn't know it yet, but JSOC did. And in the shadows beyond the desert, Alina Ward prepared herself for the first real mission of her new life, a mission that would prove just how unstoppable she truly was. No SEAL had ever seen her twice, and now the world was about to learn why. Alina Ward had made the decision to leave, but leaving wasn't as simple as stepping out of the facility. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a barren expanse under a pale moon. Every rock, every ridge, every shadow could betray a presence. She moved through it like a ghost she was trained to be, blending into the darkness, slipping past the perimeter sensors she had once been taught to master. Her gear was minimal, just the essentials she could carry without slowing herself down. No ID, no weapons that could trace back to her, no record. She wanted to erase every trace of her existence from the program that had tried to make her a tool. Every heartbeat in the desert was measured, every step calculated, every breath silent. For days she avoided highways, patrols, and towns. She survived on canned supplies she found in abandoned ranger cabins, water collected from hidden streams, and rations she stashed in secret caches during her nightly treks. The wilderness became her training ground once more, not for combat, but for survival, observation, and absolute concealment. She practiced moving silently across miles of uneven terrain, disappearing in full sight, testing the limits of her body and mind. Even in isolation, Alina felt the pull of her own abilities. She had been trained to manipulate perception, to erase herself from the field of vision. Yet in the open desert with no enemies and no missions, she realized something critical. She could vanish, but she could not hide from herself. The discipline that made her undetectable also magnified every thought, every fear, every moral question she had pushed aside during her training. One evening, while she was sheltering in a derelict cabin nestled between two sandstone cliffs, she felt it, the unmistakable awareness of being watched. Her instincts, honed by months of intense training, went on high alert. She didn't see movement. She didn't hear footsteps. But every fiber of her being screamed that someone, or something, was there. "Alina," a voice whispered from the darkness beyond the cabin's broken door. She froze. Heart hammering, she scanned the shadows with trained precision. It wasn't hostile, at least not yet, but it carried a weight she couldn't ignore. She didn't recognize the voice, and yet it commanded attention. "We're not here to drag you back," the voice continued, calm and authoritative. "We're here because a SEAL team is about to die unless you help." Alina's mind raced. JSOC. They had found her. The organization that had long shadowed global operations now wanted her, not to punish her, not to capture her, but to intervene in a life-or-death situation. She could refuse. She could vanish again into the desert, lose herself in the mountains, and sever any trace of her past. She had done it before. She could do it again. But the weight of the decision pressed on her. Lives were at stake. She had trained for years, not just to survive, but to operate beyond human limitations. She could intervene in ways others could not. She could save them. Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected to feel responsibility again, not after walking away from a life designed to strip her of moral choice. But the faces of those operators, the SEALs, flashed through her mind even though she hadn't met them yet. And she realized something. She was not a weapon anymore. She could choose to be something else. A faint exhale escaped her lips. She moved to the door, scanning every inch of the shadows before stepping outside. The recruiter waited, silent, but his eyes carried the urgency of lives dangling by a thread. "We leave now," he said simply. "You know what you're capable of. This mission, only you can succeed." Alina nodded once, not out of obedience but understanding. She had made her choice. Over the next few hours, they moved through the desert to a hidden landing zone. A small, unmarked helicopter waited, engines idling. The pilot didn't ask questions. JSOC operatives never did. They knew better than to interfere when Ghost herself was on a mission. As they lifted off, Alina looked down at the desert below. The mountains, the cliffs, the lonely river she had crossed, they all blurred together beneath the night sky. She had walked away from her past, her trainers, and the program that had tried to mold her. Now she was heading into a future defined only by her decisions. The helicopter cut through the night toward the conflict zone. Intelligence reports flickered on a digital tablet in front of her. SEAL Team 12 was pinned in a compound in eastern Syria, communications severed under heavy enemy fire. Every conventional approach would have failed. Every standard tactical plan was useless. Her mind absorbed the information with the precision of a machine, but she tempered it with instinct. Every obstacle, every threat, every unknown variable was already accounted for before she even left the aircraft. The recruiter leaned over, voice low. They won't see you coming. They don't even know you exist. You move, you extract, you disappear. That's it. No recognition, no backup, just you. Alina's eyes narrowed. She didn't need reassurance. She didn't need fear. She had been trained to operate alone, to exist in spaces where others could not. And yet, as she stared at the digital map, she felt a familiar thrill, the mixture of adrenaline, focus, and the unshakable awareness that the lives of elite soldiers now depended on her. The helicopter descended near the edge of the target zone, masked by darkness and terrain. Alina stepped onto the tarmac, boots silent, movements calculated. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. She was no longer just a woman trained for extreme operations. She was the ghost, an untraceable force moving through hostile territory, unseen and unstoppable. And as she slipped into the shadows of the Syrian city, her senses heightened. The faintest whisper of wind, the subtle vibration of distant gunfire, the imperceptible shift of a guard's stance, all were accounted for in her mind. The mission had begun, and she was already 10 steps ahead. Somewhere in the rubble of that city, operators were pinned, counting on an unknown variable to save them. And Alina Ward, the ghost, would not fail. She never did. But as she crept through the darkened streets, weaving past enemy patrols, she felt a subtle but unnerving sign, something she hadn't felt in years. Someone or something was watching her. Her instincts, honed over years of extreme training, whispered a warning. She paused, melting into the shadows, heart steady, eyes scanning the faint glow of the horizon. No one had ever tracked her before, and yet the sensation prickled her spine. A new threat, one she hadn't accounted for. And that was the moment she knew. This mission would not only test her skills, it would redefine them. The ghost was walking into danger, unlike any she had faced before. And as the Syrian night swallowed her figure, she disappeared into the darkness, leaving nothing behind but the faintest whisper of movement. No one had ever seen her twice, and tonight the first test of that rule would begin. The Syrian city sprawled beneath a night sky streaked with dust and firelight. Buildings, many reduced to skeletal ruins from weeks of bombardment, cast jagged shadows across the streets. Gunfire still echoed in distant alleys, punctuated by the occasional explosion. In this chaos, Alina Ward moved like she belonged, not as an intruder, but as a shadow that had always been there. Her target was a fortified compound outside Deir ez-Zor. Intelligence reports flagged it as a hub for weapons engineers, rogue operatives, and a stash of experimental microdrones capable of lethal autonomous strikes. A SEAL team had been sent to neutralize the threat, but communications had been severed, leaving them pinned inside. JSOC had no options left but to call in Ghost. Alina's approach was meticulous. She moved across the perimeter silently, utilizing every technique she had perfected during years of Project Chameleon training. Thermal sensors, surveillance cameras, and motion detectors were neutralized before they could register her presence. She didn't disable the systems in the conventional sense. She avoided them entirely, slipping through blind spots and exploiting the predictable lapses in automated patrols. The first challenge was the outer perimeter. Razor wire and motion-triggered mines littered the area. A conventional approach would have triggered alarms immediately, but Alina crouched low, timing her movements with the oscillation of a sensor's beam. One slight misstep could end the mission. One careless breath could alert the enemy. She exhaled slowly, moving forward like a phantom through the night. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed suspended as she inched closer to the compound. The first guards came into view, illuminated briefly by a flickering floodlight. They were heavily armed, well-trained, unaware that the ghost had already observed their patrol patterns. Alina's movements were synchronized with the rhythm of their steps. When a guard paused to check his phone, She shifted her weight, merging into the shadows and advancing 10 meters closer without detection. Then came the courtyard. The open space should have been impossible, yet she crossed it flawlessly, pressing her body against the ruined walls, using the crumbling architecture to obscure her presence. Every sensor, every patrol, every threat was accounted for, because Ghost didn't see obstacles as obstacles. She saw patterns, vulnerabilities, and openings invisible to conventional human perception. Once inside, the compound revealed its true complexity: steel corridors, motion-triggered automated defenses, and drone sentries patrolling every hallway. The drones moved faster than any human could track, armed with razor-sharp propellers and optical targeting. Any misstep meant instant death. Alina paused. She didn't need to analyze; they had trained her for this her entire life. Instead, she trusted her instincts. Timing her movement to the drone's oscillating patrol patterns, she slipped between shadows and into the hallways. Her presence did not register on the thermal scanners. Her footsteps made no sound against the concrete floor. The ghost moved like a rumor in the air, felt but unseen. Halfway through, she found them, the first SEAL, alive but pinned behind debris. His rifle lay beside him, jammed. Blood streaked his arm from a grazing wound. Fear, confusion, and relief collided on his dirt-streaked face. You're real," he whispered. "Stay quiet," Alina hissed. "We don't have time for questions." Before he could respond, a subtle mechanical click resonated down the hall. Not random, calculated. Someone or something was adjusting the patrols. Alina's eyes narrowed. This wasn't standard programming. Someone knew she was inside. Ignoring the SEAL's stunned gaze, she assessed the next section of the hall. A series of laser grids blocked direct access to the inner chambers, each overlapping with optical sensors and tripwires. One miscalculation, one hesitation, and the entire mission would be compromised. But hesitation wasn't in her repertoire. She leapt, slid, and rolled, moving like a shadow over the sensors, touching the edges of each laser grid only briefly, never triggering the alarms. The SEAL watched in awe, unable to comprehend how she could manipulate space and perception in ways he had only read about in intelligence briefings. When she reached the central control room, the rogue engineer, Dr. Halden, was crouched behind a console, frantic. Microdrones hovered silently, scanning the perimeter, awaiting orders. His hands shook as he fumbled with the control panel, trying to prevent catastrophe. "You're too late," Halden said, voice trembling. "They've programmed the drones to kill the moment anyone approaches." Alina stepped closer, silent as a whisper. "Then you'll need to help me fix it." The engineer hesitated. He had been trained to obey, to manipulate machines, but he had never dealt with her, a human ghost who moved with absolute authority. Her presence alone recalibrated the room's tension. "I can't," he said, shaking his head. I've lost control. They won't respond to manual overrides. They'll kill." "Then we move fast," she interrupted, voice steady, eyes scanning the room. Every machine, every wire, every panel was a variable. "Follow my instructions exactly. One mistake and it's over." Seconds became eternity as they worked. Alina coordinated movements with near-military precision, instructing the SEAL to disable key drones, guiding Halden to input emergency protocols while she neutralized immediate threats. Each action required split-second timing. Any hesitation, and the drones could detect them, attack, and compromise the mission. Then came the first confrontation. A drone activated prematurely, its sensors locking onto the SEAL's position. Alina reacted instantly, diving into its path, using her body as a shield and knocking it off balance. The drone crashed into the wall, sparks flying, but the SEAL remained unharmed. She barely had time to steady herself before the next drone shifted its pattern. Every movement in the room became a deadly dance. Drones, sensors, enemy patrols, all integrated into a single, fluid challenge that only Ghost could navigate. She moved seamlessly between them, neutralizing threats without firing a shot, relying on timing, momentum, and psychological precision. Minutes later, the final hallway lay before them. Beyond it, extraction point. Beyond that, survival. Beyond that, the lives of operators she had never met yet had already risked herself to protect. Alina glanced back at the SEAL and Halden. Their eyes mirrored the same awe that Jackson and Lopez had felt in Raqqa years earlier. They saw someone unreal, impossible, yet alive. "You ready?" she asked, voice calm, almost gentle. The SEAL nodded, trying to mask the fear. Halden barely breathed. Alina led the way. Step by step, shadow by shadow, they navigated the final stretch. Every sensor, every drone, every enemy patrol had been accounted for. It was a symphony of calculated movement, orchestrated by someone who didn't just move through space. She owned it. And then, as they reached the outer wall, a new variable emerged. A drone pattern changed unexpectedly. Alarms began to hum faintly. Enemy reinforcements approached from an unseen route. Alina froze. For a split second, she assessed every angle, every threat, every chance of success. The ghost didn't panic. She didn't hesitate. She smiled faintly to herself. Because no one had ever trapped her completely. And tonight, she wasn't about to let that start. The extraction wasn't over. The mission wasn't complete. The ghost had one last step to take, and the enemy didn't even know she existed. The night air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of burning rubble. Alina Ward led the SEAL and the rogue engineer through narrow alleys and collapsed corridors, the distant thrum of enemy reinforcements growing louder. Every step was a negotiation with gravity, shadow, and sound. Every heartbeat was measured, controlled. She had trained for this all her life. Yet she knew that no amount of training could prepare anyone for the unpredictability of real combat in a city falling apart around them. Behind her, the SEAL tried to keep pace. His breaths were ragged, but he dared not falter. "Ghost, what now?" he whispered almost reverently. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned every angle, reading patterns that no human should have been able to see. A drone hovered above, catching the faint glint of moonlight on its lens. A patrol rounded the corner ahead, rifles sweeping methodically. And beyond the perimeter walls, the faint glow of explosions signaled the enemy's awareness of intrusion. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "We move like shadows. We become one with the ruins. Watch, follow, but don't lead." The SEAL nodded, fear and awe mingling in his expression. Halden the engineer followed silently, a trembling figure in the ghost's wake. Neither man could comprehend the fluidity of her movements. She didn't run. She didn't sprint. She flowed. Like water spilling through a fractured dam, filling every gap, slipping past every obstacle. As they approached the central courtyard, the tension ratcheted higher. The courtyard was heavily fortified, sandbag barricades, automated turrets, and roaming guards. But Alina had studied the satellite feeds, memorized patrol routes, and anticipated response times. Her plan was simple: infiltrate, neutralize, and extract the SEAL team. Execution, however, demanded perfection. She crouched behind a crumbling wall, eyes narrowing. A patrol approached from the left. 2 guards, rifles trained and flashlights cutting through the shadows. Alina didn't hesitate. She waited for the exact moment their focus shifted. A slight adjustment in stance, a minor hand movement, and then she vanished from their line of sight. Not slowly, not cautiously. She ceased to exist in their perception, slipping behind them along the wall and into the shadow of a supply shed. The patrol passed. The SEAL whispered, disbelief lacing his voice. "How did you?" "Keep moving," she hissed, already scanning the next sector. Inside the supply shed, they found temporary cover. Alina assessed the courtyard. 2 more turrets, 4 guards, a drone patrol sweeping in semicircular arcs. The SEAL team had to move now or risk being overwhelmed. Time was a weapon in the enemy's favor, but Alina bent it. "Halden," she commanded, voice crisp, "override the turret systems. I'll distract the patrol." The engineer's hands shook as he fumbled with the console. Alina slipped out of cover, moving with the precision of a trained predator. She didn't fire a shot. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was the distraction. A faint shadow here, a reflected light there, and the enemy's perception fractured. Confused, the guards adjusted their patrols. Drones wavered, momentarily unsure. It was all the opening they needed. Halden completed the override. Turrets powered down. The SEAL team, guided by Alina, moved silently through the courtyard, reaching the compound entrance without triggering a single alarm. It was a sequence of impossible calculations executed flawlessly. Every timing, every movement, every threat anticipated and neutralized before it existed. But then the first real obstacle. Inside the compound, the hallways twisted like a labyrinth. Enemy operatives, previously unaccounted for, moved with unpredictable speed. One turned a corner and froze, spotting movement in the shadows. The SEAL drew his weapon instinctively. Alina acted instantly, sliding between the operative and the SEAL, knocking him off balance with a precise strike that left him unconscious, silent, and hidden behind debris. "Keep moving," she urged. "No hesitation." The team moved deeper, navigating the maze of corridors. Alina paused at a junction, sensing movement above. A sniper perched on a balcony had spotted the intruders. One shot and the mission would fail. Her hand went to the edge of her tactical suit. No weapon was needed. With calculated timing, she threw a small, reflective device. Light bounced off the walls, dazzling the sniper just long enough for them to move undetected. The SEAL team reached a storage room where the remaining pinned operators were trapped. Bullets had shredded crates and smoke choked the air. The men inside were battered, exhausted, and near despair. Alina's voice cut through the haze. "On your feet, we're leaving now." The team followed, moving as she guided them through the labyrinth. Every turn was calculated. Every obstacle had already been accounted for. Enemy fire blazed behind them, yet not a single shot struck its intended target. Then came the drone patrol, a swarm of micro-drones, faster and more lethal than any they had encountered outside the facility. The SEAL instinctively reached for cover. Alina didn't flinch. She stepped into their path, moving fluidly, redirecting the drones with subtle shifts in momentum and precise interference. A drone clipped her shoulder briefly, sparks scattering, but she continued without pause. She was not a soldier. She was a force of nature, intangible yet unstoppable. As they approached the extraction point, the walls behind them exploded under enemy artillery. Debris and fire rained down, cutting off any possibility of retreat. The SEAL team looked to Alina, realizing fully for the first time that they had survived purely because of her. She assessed the situation instantly. The only option was forward, through the chaos, through the destruction, into the waiting helicopter that marked salvation. The team moved as one, led by her silent command. Every step was deliberate, every heartbeat measured. Even with the compound collapsing behind them, she maintained control, ensuring no one was lost. Then, as they reached the rooftop extraction point, a new variable emerged. Enemy reinforcements had cut off the secondary exit. Helicopter landing zone compromised. There was no way out, except through a vertical drop onto the roof of an adjacent building. Without hesitation, Alina led. Ropes were secured. Operators descended one by one. Her turn came last. She surveyed the surrounding buildings, the gunfire below, and the collapsing courtyard. Every exit was a threat. Every angle was a potential ambush. Yet she moved with complete certainty. As she descended, a bullet struck the edge of the rope. Sparks flew. Alina's gloved hands gripped tighter, adjusting her weight with the precision of someone who had been trained for impossible situations her entire life. She landed silently, rolled, and melted into the shadowed perimeter of the building. Below, the SEAL team boarded the helicopter. The engine roared, lifting them into the night sky, leaving the compound behind in flames and confusion. Alina watched from the rooftop. She wasn't on the manifest. She didn't exist, she never would. And the SEAL team, her allies in this operation, would never know who had saved them. She vanished into the darkness as the helicopter disappeared over the horizon. No footprints, no evidence, no recognition. Just a whisper of movement fading into the night. And somewhere in the ruins of the compound, enemy forces scrambled, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Reports would later speak of impossible survival, of extraction against all odds, of a figure that could not be seen or caught. JSOC analysts would later review the satellite feeds, patrol logs, and survivor reports. And in every case, the conclusion would be the same. Someone had moved like a ghost. And she had. But Alina Ward was already gone, already disappearing into the chaos of the city, ready for the next mission, the next impossible challenge, the next moment where her legend would grow. No SEAL had ever seen her twice. And as the night swallowed her form, even she knew the rule was absolute. The ghost did not linger. The ghost did not wait. The ghost existed in a state beyond time, beyond perception, beyond comprehension. And the world, both ally and enemy, would never see her coming. Alina Ward had thought she was untouchable. She had moved through deserts, cities, and battlefields, unseen and unstoppable. But in the weeks following the Raqqa extraction, something shifted. She was no longer only the hunter. Someone or something was tracking her. It began subtly. A drone flickering at the edge of her vision. A patrol pattern too precise to be random. Footsteps that didn't belong. At first she dismissed them. Ghostesque intuition told her the city was alive with chaos. The enemy's movements were erratic, predictable, manipulable. But instinct nagged this was different, precise, calculated, targeted. The first warning came in Istanbul. She had taken refuge in an abandoned hotel overlooking the Bosporus, a city teeming with civilians, chaos, and cover. Night fell, and she moved silently across the tiled roof, watching the fairy lights glimmer below. Then a sound, soft, deliberate, almost imperceptible, snapped her attention. Footsteps above the tiles, not random tourist movement, not stray animals. Someone was following her. Alina froze. Every fiber in her body screamed to vanish, to merge with the shadows. But she didn't run. She let the intruder come closer, studying the pattern. Every step, every micro-movement told her one thing. This was no ordinary hunter. This was trained, precise, dangerous. And they weren't alone. From the adjacent building, a figure appeared on the roofline. Black gear, mask obscuring identity, movements fluid, confident, and deliberate. Alina's mind raced, calculating odds. He or she moved like her, ghost-like. Her first thought was disbelief. No one had ever tracked her, not during Raqqa, not during the compound extraction, not ever. And yet here they were. She assessed. The figure mirrored her timing, anticipating her movements. Every dash, roll, and leap was countered. This wasn't a patrol, not a random hunter. This was a counter-ghost. Someone trained to do exactly what she did. Someone who could move through shadows, anticipate threats, and strike before anyone realized they existed. Her pulse remained calm, but a cold edge ran through her mind. She had survived every mission, every ambush, every impossible scenario. But now she faced a new variable, someone who could match her. The confrontation was almost ritualistic. Across the roof lines, they moved in a deadly ballet. Alina leapt from one crumbling terrace to another, but the shadow followed, fluid, untouchable. She dropped low behind a ventilator shaft, assessing her adversary. He circled, calculated, waiting for a misstep. Finally he spoke, voice modulated through a tactical mask. Ghost. The single word carried weight, recognition, admiration, threat. Alina's lips pressed into a thin line. Who sent you? She demanded, voice quiet but lethal. Orders, the shadow replied. JSOC thinks you're too unpredictable, you're a risk, a liability, you move too freely. Someone has to keep the balance. The words hit her like a thunderclap. JSOC, the same organization that had once called her in to save lives now considered her expendable. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she said, crouched, ready to strike. "Maybe," he countered, "but I've been trained for you. Everything you do I can anticipate." The first clash was almost imperceptible. A flash of movement, a metallic clang, a shadow slipping past another. Elena fought instinctively, but she quickly realized brute force was useless. This opponent mirrored her, predicting her every move. She ducked into the alleyways below, using the darkness and urban terrain to her advantage, but the shadow followed, unwavering. The city became a maze, each street, rooftop, and broken building a chessboard. Elena was Ghost. She was untouchable. And yet, for the first time, someone challenged that supremacy. Her mind raced. Escape was not enough. She couldn't allow this shadow to compromise the secrecy of her operations or endanger lives dependent on her missions. She needed a plan, and fast. The opportunity came unexpectedly. A rooftop hatch leading to an abandoned warehouse. Elena ducked inside, disappearing into the cavernous darkness. The shadow followed, unaware that she had preemptively rigged the building. Silent tripwires, pressure-sensitive floors, and dust sensors, all calibrated to her movements, not his. As he entered, the warehouse transformed into a trap. Metal beams swung, debris fell, and alarms flashed. The shadow reacted, but Elena had anticipated each move. Using speed, timing, and misdirection, she slipped past the final obstacle and disappeared into the labyrinth of crates and shadows beyond. The counter-ghost paused, frustration evident even through the mask. This wasn't over. He or she would not fail. They would track, follow, and confront again. Elena knew the rules of engagement had changed. She had been untouchable before. Now she had a stalker, an operative designed to neutralize her, to match her skills, to challenge her ghost-like existence. She moved quickly through Istanbul's underbelly, ducking into sewers, abandoned warehouses, and back alleys. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, but now there was fear. Not of death, not of failure, but fear of exposure. Fear of someone finally seeing her twice. JSOC had underestimated her, or perhaps they had overestimated their ability to control the uncontrollable. Either way, Elena knew one thing. She could not allow this shadow to succeed. The lives of operatives, the secrecy of operations, and her very freedom depended on her vanishing, yet engaging, strategy. Hours passed. The city seemed endless. Footsteps echoed, but Elena's reflexes were flawless. She led the shadow through a sequence of false leads, narrow escapes, and feints that disoriented him. And then, just as dawn crept over the Bosporus, she vanished completely. No trace, no sound, only a whisper of movement lost in the city's awakening. From afar, the shadow stopped, realizing he had been outmaneuvered for now. But a silent promise lingered. This was not the end. Elena took a deep breath, her chest tight with exertion and anticipation. For the first time, she felt the true weight of her existence. Invisible, untouchable, necessary, but hunted. She was Ghost. She had never been caught, never been confronted like this. And yet now her legend was on the line. The world hadn't changed, she had. And the shadow would be back. Because no one hunts the ghost and survives untested. Tonight, Elena Ward learned that even the untouchable has limits, and the real challenge had only begun. The night was colder than usual, a biting wind slicing through the streets of Istanbul. Elena Ward crouched atop the roof of an abandoned textile factory, her eyes scanning the horizon. Every alley, every rooftop, every flickering streetlight was a potential threat. She knew the shadow was out there, hunting, calculating, waiting for a misstep. She had anticipated his return. He had been testing her, probing for weaknesses, leaving breadcrumbs to gauge her reactions. Ghost had never faced a hunter who could match her in skill, speed, and calculation. But this night, she would end the game. Her mind raced through the tactical variables, escape routes, choke points, improvised obstacles, potential blind spots. Every possible scenario was accounted for. Every possible contingency had been tested in her head over and over during weeks of anticipation. She had prepared not just to survive, but to turn the tables. Then, as if on cue, he appeared, black-clad, moving with the same fluid grace she had trained to perfection. His eyes, visible behind tactical lenses, locked onto her position. A smirk played on the edge of her mind, not from arrogance but recognition. Finally, she faced an equal. "You shouldn't have disappeared," he said, voice low, modulated, almost reverent. "Neither should you," she replied, her voice steady, her stance calm. She wasn't afraid, not yet. Fear had no place here. She was Ghost. The first move was subtle, a flicker, a shadow shifting between two broken vents. Then the dance began. Alina leapt across rooftop gaps, rolling off edges, flipping, sliding into shadows. He followed, fluid, precise, a mirror of her own movements. Every step, every motion, every landing calculated. The city below was oblivious to the duel playing out above their heads. But Ghost didn't fight like the ordinary. She didn't rely on brute force. She relied on perception, anticipation, and subtle manipulation of space and sound. She led him across the rooftops into a maze of abandoned scaffolding. Each step she took was both bait and trap. Every shadow, every beam, every crevice was part of the plan. He responded with equal skill. Every feint she executed, he countered. Every gap she jumped, he landed flawlessly behind her. For the first time, Ghost realized she was not just dealing with an operative. She was dealing with someone trained specifically to match her abilities. Then came the first break in the equilibrium. A broken section of scaffolding gave way under her weight. She fell, but not as one would expect. She twisted midair, landing silently on a narrow ledge 10 meters below, using momentum to absorb the impact. He followed, but misjudged the drop, landing with a loud clang that echoed across the empty streets. A subtle grin curved her lips. The first advantage was hers. She moved fast. Using the shadows of the collapsed factory, she led him into the interior, corridors dark and tight, constraining his movement. Outside, the wind howled through broken windows. Inside, dust and debris muted every sound except her own heartbeat, and the faint, controlled pulse of his pursuit. Then came the confrontation. In a vast warehouse room, moonlight spilling through shattered roof panels, they finally faced each other, inches apart. Each had studied the other's moves for weeks, if not months, and now the duel came down to instinct and anticipation. "You were trained to vanish," he said, "but someone always leaves a trace." "Not this time," she replied. "I move like the wind. I disappear because I choose to." The first strike was sudden. He lunged, knife aimed with surgical precision. Alina shifted her weight, sidestepped, and redirected his momentum with a swift twist. He stumbled but recovered instantly, flipping backward, landing silently like a cat. They fought not as ordinary humans, but as shadows incarnate, striking, twisting, disappearing, reappearing. Every sound of their movement was deliberate, every breath calculated. The fight was a chess match in 3 dimensions, with debris, shadows, and moonlight as the board. Then Alina saw her opening. He had grown confident, mirroring her moves almost predictably. Using a combination of misdirection and precise timing, she feigned a retreat, luring him toward a narrow overhead walkway. The boards were old, warped, and fragile. He followed, step by step, and at the right moment she applied a small but precise push. One board snapped under his weight, sending him sliding down a chute of debris, trapped temporarily but unharmed. Alina didn't gloat, she didn't hesitate. She moved to secure the area and check on the SEAL team she had guided earlier. She had completed the primary mission. Extraction had succeeded, lives had been saved. But this duel, the hunt, was far from over. From a shadowed corner he emerged, climbing out of the rubble with a faint smirk. Respect, admiration, a silent acknowledgement that she had bested him, but only temporarily. "You're extraordinary," he said. JSOC doesn't deserve you. I work for no one, she replied. I am my own mission. For a moment, they simply regarded each other. Equal, unmatched, mirrored phantoms in the ruins. Then he disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind no trace but the echo of footsteps. Alina watched him go. The threat remained, but she had survived. She had won, not by brute force, but by strategy, anticipation, and the very skill that had earned her the moniker Ghost. She exhaled slowly, allowing herself the briefest moment of reflection. The city sprawled below, oblivious to the legend moving above it. The SEAL team was safe. The mission complete. But she knew the truth. Her life would never be ordinary. She would never be seen twice, never fully understood, never captured. Ghostesque by design, lethal by necessity. Invisible, untouchable, unstoppable. As she melted into the night, disappearing across rooftops, she allowed a rare thought to surface, a hint of humanity in a life defined by shadows. Perhaps she was no longer just a weapon. Perhaps she was a guardian. And somewhere, far above the city, the first light of dawn began to streak the sky. Alina Ward, the ghost, vanished with it. No one saw her coming. No one ever would. And the legend continued.